Ahoy Vshikni, it's Jen from Dream Prague, the channel where I give you a foreigner's perspective on life in Prague, Czech Republic. I wanted to pop in with a quick video today because I've been busy studying for the Czech citizenship test. The language test I will take next month, but this test is about Czech culture, Czech history, politics, and even some administrivia. So I've got that coming up on Saturday and I got to get back to studying. But as I was studying, I kind of had some thoughts that I wanted to share with you about becoming a citizen of another country. So there's a lot of requirements to become a citizen in both the United States and the Czech Republic. And I've been living here for 10 years and I've learned a lot of the language, learned a lot of the culture. And even if I do pass all of these exams, I don't know that I will ever feel Czech. Certainly, I don't know that my future fellow Czech citizens would consider me to be Czech. So today I want to talk about how becoming a Czech citizen is very different from becoming an American citizen and how that affects me personally. So the US is somewhat famous, or maybe infamous, depending on your view, for what's called birthright citizenship, meaning that if you are born on American soil, you get to be an American citizen. Even if your parents are just there on vacation, legally or illegally. There are a few exceptions to this. If you are a foreign diplomat and you have a child in the United States, that child is not a citizen. But in general, we do practice birthright citizenship. Now, the US, strangely, is not the only country to practice this birthright citizenship. But interestingly, most of the countries that do practice it are in North and South America. And this has something to do with the colonial past. Colonists wanted their children to be citizens of the country, and so this is how it started. I believe it started in the United States because when they freed the slaves, they had to make some way so that these slaves were in fact US citizens, and so that they implemented this birthright citizenship. Czechs, on the other hand, are like most European countries, maintaining the principle of citizenship by blood. That is, you have to be born to a Czech citizen, or both of your maternal or paternal grandparents would have to be Czech citizens. Now, of course, there are other ways to become citizens in each of these countries, like naturalization, which is the process that I'm going through, spending a certain length of time in the country and then taking an exam. But this birthright citizenship versus blood citizenship is the main differentiator, and it kind of makes sense when you think of the national character of each of these countries. What I want to talk about is how those two types of citizenships have an effect on even a naturalized citizen, like the type that I'm trying to be. So the idea of a country or a nationality usually has to do with language and shared history, shared customs, shared myths even. Whether those myths are true or if they're fabricated or exaggerated. The Czechs have a long history, a long culture, a story, maybe it's a myth, of specific individuals bound together by this history of their ancestors. So like, for example, forefather Czech on Mount Rip. This is the heritage that all of the Czechs are born into. And so the idea of Czech people is based around ancestry, essentially bloodlines, connecting all the way back to these Czech forefathers. And so it makes sense that Czech citizenship would be based on blood, based on your family line. The US, on the other hand, is a historical mess of cultures who had many different languages and histories and religions and traditions. And so creating a common story or myth in the United States was even more important than creating one in a country like the Czech Republic, because we had to basically keep the society together. Otherwise, we were just a bunch of different religions and different cultures that were forced to share resources, and that never really works out well. So we kind of have this shared myth that our ancestors arrived at Ellis Island looking for opportunity and better lives, and their strange foreign names were modified to be more American, and they went on to, work hard and prosper, no matter what their origins were. But this myth that we cling to was largely meant to divert attention from the really bad parts of American history. The massacre of Native Americans and hundreds of years of slavery, and then decades of terrible treatment of and legal discrimination of, Irish Catholics and Italians and Chinese. I mean, there's hardly a ethnic group in the United States that was actually ever welcomed into the U.S. Everybody's got a really crap start when they arrive. So the U.S. doesn't have an ethnic nationalism like the Czechs. The U.S. actually has a potential powder keg of religions and ethnicities and languages. English is the common language, but it's not a requirement. And so Americans have had to constantly nurture this myth of America just to keep the country together. And then naturally, because you have so many different ethnicities, you end up with children who are like half this and 1/16 that. It's a common topic in basic school in the US to discuss like your heritage, where your ancestors came from. And it gives all the kids in America the idea that, one, we are most likely a mix of people from all over the world, and two, we are no different than the immigrants who just arrived yesterday. It's just that it was our parents or our grandparents or our great-grandparents who immigrated, but we all did. I remember as a kid even having to research your ancestors' original ethnic names and how they were changed when they arrived in the country. Mine were Dunsmore, and they became Dunsmore, and Catterick became Catterick. I'm sure there are many more, but those are the ones I know. I remember when I first arrived in Prague and I was teaching English to adults, I would ask my students where their ancestors came from, just as like a conversation starter. And they'd be like, Kladno. And I'd say, no, like way back in the day, like way generations ago, where did they come from? And they were like, Kladno. Occasionally I'd have a student with like a German grandparent. But on the whole, the concept of I'm a quarter Irish and I'm a quarter German and I'm like a quarter Moroccan and, Italian, that just doesn't really exist in this country. This is a uniquely American thing, probably Canadian as well, but it's unique to us, and I didn't really understand that at first. This is also super interesting because we learn the history of American forefathers like Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, but most of our relatives, our ancestors, arrived like hundreds of years after those guys were dead. Less than 100 years ago, my ancestors were working on their tans in the Bay of Kotor. And, 80 years before that, my other relatives were starving at the potato famine. So while we have forefathers, they're not really ours. God, I wonder what percentage of Americans are actually even related to people who were in America then. I bet it's quite low. But in order for the 330 million Americans to feel cohesive, we have to buy into this myth that our ancestors were basically here through all of the important founding events. People always ask me if my husband Hansa is Czech, firstly because his name is Hansa. He calls himself Hansa because that's his Czech name, because we live here and he's adopted that as his Czech name. But in truth, he does have Czech blood. He's a quarter Czech. Now, I'm the one applying for Czech citizenship, but I bet that many Czech people would consider him, with 1/4 Czech blood, to be more Czech than me, an Irish, English, Swedish, Montenegrin who just happened to pass an exam on, Czech culture. There are certain indicators that you are becoming more Czech, I would say. You speak the language, that's obviously so important. You drink beer, you love svičková. All of these things, they say, make you more Czech. I think having a Czech sense of humor is a big indicator of being accepted here as a Czech person. I had one comment on one of my fake news videos the other day, and this guy said that I couldn't attempt Czech humor until I spoke the language perfectly and I'd read, and he listed off all these Czech books. So basically, I couldn't attempt Czech humor until I was Czech. So you see what I'm saying here. I think that Czech people really think that it's not something that can be acquired. It's something that is in your blood. And I don't think he was trying to be rude or discriminatory. I just think that this is citizenship by blood, and I imagine it's similar in other European countries as well. Now, many kind commenters tell me, you're one of us already, but I think they're just being nice. The truth is, I don't think I will ever feel Czech or be considered Czech. If I can pass this exam and the language one next month, and they approve me, they'll give me a passport and I'll get to vote in their elections. But there's not the same feeling of being a true puzzle piece that fits into the story of the nation. America's very composition is made up of immigrants. That's our myth. That's our story. Even though some of these immigrants were treated terribly and some were brought forcibly, this is our national myth, that we are all different, but we can all be the same. That's what binds us together. And I will be so proud and happy when I finally go through whatever the swearing in process is to become a Czech citizen. But when I think of the American swearing in process to become an American citizen, it's the minute that you do become a citizen, you're automatically part of this multifaceted quilt that only is as beautiful as it is because of your difference, because you are different, because you are unique, because you speak this language and you practice this religion and you're from this other country. And that is what America is made up of. Whereas becoming a Czech citizen, it's I get to hook on to a Czech quilt made up of some Czech pattern that's very historical and been around for 1,000 years. But I'm just this little foreigner that gets to hang along for the ride. I don't actually become part of the fabric. And I'm not sad about that, but it's kind of the difference between a country that allows a child to become a citizen because they're on the soil, and a country that allows a child to become a citizen if their bloodline is from the country. And neither are good or bad. It's just different. But yeah, I'm really curious, especially to hear from both, especially to hear from Czechs who have become American citizens. Do they feel as much a part of America as they do Czech? Or is it something totally different? And then from other countries, who have become Czech citizens, do they really feel Czech, or do they feel okay, I got the paperwork done, they're going to let me stay? So I'm really interested in what you have to say. So please tell me in the comments, and I'm sure that other people would like to read your experiences too. Tak, uvidíme se příští týden. Ahoj.